Hey, and thank you, Marta, for the introduction. And good morning, all. My name is Fang Zhang. Again, it is my pleasure to be here on a Thursday morning, and I hope you got your coffee and have your notes ready because today we're going to talk about something that is focused on transitions, especially career transitions from my many choices that I made during the past several years. And hopefully they can bring you certain levels of inspiration if that is not imminent in your career path. So allow me to share my screen. And so the topic that I'm presenting today is called From Academia to Industry, a personal experience as well as an in-depth guide of post-COVID job hunting for STEM, PhD, and postdocs. So I labeled it such a way because it is most related to my experience that I can showcase to you. However, there may be things in there that is also pertain to you if you are not there yet for pursuing a PhD or postdoc, but I hope my presentation offers certain levels of inspiration and encouragement in such a field. So first, a little bit about my connections with University of Pennsylvania. So when I first come to United States, that was 2012, I was participating a kind of a debate competition called Startup Outlook. It is a kind of a competition organized by the state media in China, and it has a collaboration with University of Pennsylvania, which is their first inaugural international competition in the US. So therefore, it makes me visit University of Pennsylvania at my first institution ever visited in the US, which left a great impression on me and helped me decide to come study in the US. So I still can remember the time that I just wandering in the campus of UPenn, trying different food, the Philly cheese and all that. It was a great memory. And I really enjoying my visit at University of Pennsylvania and glad to be here 8 years later presenting a talk that doesn't seem to be connected to that very reason at first. So without further ado, a little bit expectations for today's presentation. So first, this is not in any means a kind of a success story. It's more like just a transition story, telling you the kind of a role path that I go through in my life as a PhD, as a postdoc, and then my transition into industry. And this is definitely not one of those seminars because personally, I'm not a big fan of seminar. In our department, every other Friday, they require all the graduate students to mandatorily attend the department seminar from a random speaker they brought up from some university, which has a topic that no interest to me at all. And I don't want to become that kind of a speaker. So today I'm presenting something to you, hopefully that can be related to your life in the future. And second, during my presentations, there will be quite a lot of references of humors and pop cultures. And I hope you don't mind the usage of them because I use a lot of them because I find that, humor and sarcasm is one of the best defense when you're doing your grad school because there's nothing else there for you. But and last but not least, this talk was intended for STEM field, and just like all of you guys are here in chemistry, and more particularly for people from PhD or postdocs thinking about transition into industry. However, there are definitely factors in this presentation that will gives you different kind of inspiration if you're not in that kind of a career stage. So hopefully that for people from all spectrums of academic programs, you can enjoy this presentation. So for the structure of this presentation, I divided into two parts. The first chapter is about a roadmap of myself in academia from 2013 to last year. And I will talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the things that I have been through. And this will be a relatively smaller portion of today's presentation. And then the larger portion of today's presentation will be heavily focused on my transition into industry, which happened readily during this year. And I'll tell you about the why, the how, and the what I did in order to transition into industry. So chapter 1, the roadmap of my academia career. So my degree pursuit is relatively straightforward. I get my bachelor's degree from China, from a university called Sichuan University. If you don't know that university, is perfectly fine, but you definitely know Giant Panda. And that's where Giant Panda come from, the very province, Sichuan. And there's also a lot of Sichuan cuisine in every part of US as one of the major cuisine, as a kind of a Chinese dishes presented outside of China. And that's where I graduated with my bachelor degree in chemistry. And afterwards, I take a year off working because my parents, they are journalists. They are in no means scientists. And they always ask, why do you bother to study science? Like if you choose your career in media or in journalism, you can have a very promising future because we have all kind of connections. You can go to the best school in China if you want to. But I say, no, I don't want to do media. I want to do something that is helping me make a difference in our society. So I undoubtedly chose to study science. And then I keep following my passion to continue my study. After my visit to UPenn, as well as several universities at Philadelphia, it certainly made my mind to apply for schools for my graduate study in the US. So then I chose University of Massachusetts because they are the first one who chose me. I have no idea about other universities, but the 3 universities I visited in Philadelphia. So if they chose me first, I accept an offer and I go there to do my chemistry in a master's degree. And I wasn't studying a PhD at that time because I'm not sure if I want to conduct a PhD or if I want to conduct a PhD at this very institution. But after 2 years, I spent my time at this school, I find uh, uh, such a magic that attract me to stay in this very institution and then continue my PhD. And not only because it offers me a unique opportunity in the kind of a topic that I pursued, but also because of the people in this institution. That is the core attraction to me and helping me build up not just my academic career, but also something else. So afterwards, I've spent a year in the Mass Biomanufacturing Center, which is also the same lab I was working on. We're doing a lot of contract work with different pharmaceutical industries, especially in the analysis and the characterization of biopharmaceutical products and drug candidates. So we have numerous collections with companies at the Greater Boston area or Eastern Coast. And that is one of the reasons I stepped forward into industry. So my career path in the academia is relatively straightforward, from bachelor to master's to PhD and then to postdoc. However, there's another spectrum of my participation in my school, which I called volunteer leadership. And that has been going through from the time I arrived to the United States until even right now. So when I first I came in through a pathway program called Navitas. And it's kind of a program that facilitating people from a foreign country and adapting their cultural changes, as well as facilitating them in the academic pursuit in the institution. So I first come through that program and then I participate in their orientation. And I found myself couldn't stop to do things like that. So I keep doing orientation and serving as their leader for 8 semesters continuously. And it's kind of serving as a start of my another spectrums of career besides of academia. And after that, I had an opportunity to work in the Office of International Students and Scholars Office as a student employee and also as a cultural ambassador for 3 semesters. And it gives me a kind of open view of the world because the very duty of that office is to admit the international students and the scholars from the globe and helping them transition into their life in the US. And that gives me the very opportunity to first get the sense of a taste of diversity, equity, and inclusion. and then shaped my following career path. And after that, I see there's a kind of divide in every campus, actually, that we have a large international student population who's from a various different culture, and then we have even more domestic students studying in there. But sometimes there's a lack of interaction between these two groups, which is completely natural, and it's just a natural philosophy and a psychology between people of different groups. And therefore, to counter that kind of effect and bringing more inclusion to the peoples, I founded a program called the PARA programs. Basically, it's a very simple concept. It's by introducing an opportunity towards these people and get them together so they can establish a meaningful relationship in the longer term. And the picture I showcase in here is the program, a kickoff date of our third or fourth year of the program. So the program has been lasted for now the 7th year, and we have about 2,000 participants coming through this program from 50 different countries. And after that, I just couldn't stop the trend of getting myself involved in different kind of activities on campus. And then one of the other things I did is called the Graduate Student Association, which is basically the graduate student government, or which I believe on UPenn is called Graduate Student and Professional Senate or Association. And it's I get involved in this association for 5 years, basically the entire tenure of my PhD, from treasurer to vice president and then president for 3 years. And what it's helped me to learn is that how to building a culture, because especially among graduate students, which is different slightly from our undergraduate time, is that we focus a lot more on our individual researches as well as our own groups, and not so much on a kind of a communal term. But in order for something to make changes, for example, one of the most obvious, we are trying to negotiate our contract with the university because our pay is miserable. And in order to do that, we need to have a very strong foundation of a community where graduate student and professional student can get together and then facing these issues together. And that's one of the initiatives that I did, trying to build a culture throughout this adventure. And at the same time, I was participating in another activity called a Student Alumni Ambassador, which is the university programs gathering together a group of students from undergrad to graduate studies of different major and giving them necessary training and equipment where they can be served as the volunteers and the face of the universities during major events, especially with alumni and friends, like annual giving and homecoming, etc., etc. And that was another great opportunity for me that I keep participating for another 5 years. So don't ask me how did I spend my weekend during my PhD, because I literally had none. And that opportunity get me a chance to really get out of my lab and to meet people. So I call that a journey to the future, because the major people I had interactions with are alumni and friends of the university who already spent their career in the industry or whatever profession they practice. So by helping me into that kind of settings, I get an idea of how myself might look like in the future and how would I use the kind of knowledge and skills I built up during my graduate studies into real world. So it gives me a kind of a confidence as well as assurance of that the things that I learned is actually going to be useful. And then after my participation or during my participation with the Graduate Student Association, I got involved with the national counterpart of this association called the National Association of Graduate and Professional Studies, which I believe UPenn was a member of NAGPS a couple of years ago. And I was first getting involved as the director of international student concerns and later as the vice president and COO of the association. So I was working in the HGPS for 2 years, and it was such a fun experience because working with graduate students on your campus is one thing. Working with graduate students all across the states is another, because you get to meet so many people you never know that you're going to meet and understand and know their studies that you never imagined of. And in the end, you find that no matter how different the school is, the state, the region, the kind of a challenge you face are pretty much common for the graduate students and professional students. The awareness, the recognition, the uncertainty, the kind of an internal conflict that we all suffering from during our graduate schools. So that was one of the very beautiful experience I had. And at the same time, I was also getting involved at one of the fraternal organization, which is called the Masonry. And many of you may know this one as in many of the conspiracy theory, especially the movie from Nicolas Cage, National Treasure. And I am not a conspirator or conspiracy theory advocate, and I can definitely tell you we are not trying to conquer the world. But by participating in a kind of a fraternal organization, not on campus, but in the society, it gives me a very different perspective because the people that I met previously during all the kind of engagement on campus are people more related to higher education or the people that is in our STEM field. But having the kind of opportunity to get out and meet others, especially people who is not in the STEM field, and more so not even close to higher education, it opens up another spectrums of perspectives, helping me understand where people come from, why they have certain political intensity or chosen like why they prefer Trump or over Biden, or why they having these kind of a very polarity in our current socio-political environment divide. So by understanding that, it helped me more easily to relate to them and then to help them understand where I, in their definition as definitely someone come from the left, come from. So it gives me an opportunity to convince them we have more in similarity than that of difference. So I am definitely not a fan of our current political divide. You are either the Republicans or the Democrats. But I think in the end of the day, we have a lot more in common than our differences. So that is what the beauty of this opportunity gave me. And last but not least, after my graduation last year during COVID, I get involved with another association called National Postdoctoral Association. And I was serving now in the board of directors, helping the association shaping a better future for the postdocs and the communities nationwide. So that's another new frontier that I'm getting involved right now. And so if I look back during my past 7 years of graduate study from master's to PhD, in my own opinion, I took a long time to complete this degree work, which I believe in a lot of others' capacity, they can finish that in 5 years or even less. But during this process, I have gathered together a lot of different perspectives and values through my volunteer participations in different organizations. I think that opportunity makes me a whole person in terms of what I want to be. So let me go over a little bit about the good, the bad, and the ugly, in my own opinion, of the academic career that I participated. So the good thing, of course, goes first. So again, a disclaimer, if we have any undergraduate or master's participants during this talk, this is no means to dissuade you from pursuing your PhD. Because let me tell you, getting a PhD, in my opinion, is one of a kind experience. I never regret myself to pursue my PhD at the first place because it helps me understand, gives me this kind of experience that only by getting into a doctoral program that you can go through the internal struggles, the mental and the physical sufferings. But sometimes, if you don't suffer or meet the challenge, you don't really get the reward. So it is a character builder to me, and it offers me a set of a critical skill set that is no other kind of experience can provide, and certain long-term rewards. For example, no matter wherever you go, you can ask people to call you doctor instead of a mister. I believe that's one of the major attractions for many people doing PhD because that kind of a title incentives. But getting back, besides of the goods, there is certainly a lot of places that is not as good as what we would imagine. So by presenting you the bad as well as the ugly, I hope to give you a kind of a correct expectation if you ever want to venturing into the realm of a doctoral degree. So the bad thing, in my opinion, about my PhD experience, first I call the reciprocity, which means the amount of effort you put into your program, as well as the amount of tangible reward you're getting out, is often not in proportion. So, for example, normally spend 60 hours a week in my lab doing relevant works, sometimes at very off hours, like late or during the weekends. So if you're a PhD or a postdoc, you definitely understand that experience, because we all been through that very terrible moments where the campus is completely empty, but it's only us being there doing experimentations. And which means it offers me a very bad and poor work-life balance, which I hope many of you who decide to pursue the PhD degree trying to uphold that front at first, because you need to give your advisor an impression that you are trying to keep your work-life balance, because if you don't do so, your time definitely going to be taken advantage of. And then another thing is the uncertainty during my doctoral pursuit, because not like undergraduate or master's degree, you have a set schedules of graduation. You have a curriculum, 4 years for bachelor's and 2 years for master's, even less. But for PhD, you can go beyond 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, one of the most common question my parents is asking me, and I hate about that, is that when are you going to graduate? Really, like, because I can't tell you, I don't know. Like the program just goes until the point where your advisor thinks you are ready to graduate, or your work is coming to a kind of a certain milestone that you can graduate. And then there's another peer pressure comes in at the same time, because they often mention to me that, you look at the kids from that family, or you look at the kids from the other family, they already get a job, they get a family, they have their babies, and et cetera, et cetera. And then at the same time, you look at your peers from the past, they already established their career, they're working, and now you are, as someone, you call yourself a student, but you're not really a student because you're getting paid at the same time. You can't explain the nature of your work towards lay people who has no idea about what PhD is. So that kind of a peer pressure is another thing that add an extra layer of the stress of doing PhD. But then the ugly part of doing PhD, and I strongly, strongly warn anyone who's trying to venture into the PhD realm, is to be cautious about where you go into, because the PhD program or each PhD lab is their own kingdoms or their own realms. Every lab has a very different and distinct culture. The culture is pretty much dictated by the PI of that research group alone. And then, fortunately, I have a very, very good PI who is supportive and understanding of what I do, and gives me time to do all those extracurricular things I mentioned previously. But then I also witnessed that some of my peers who have PIs who is very much less tolerant than what their students is doing, because they consider their students more like an employee, and they really enjoy micromanaging. So I strongly recommend anyone who want to go to PhD to do your research, do your homework, find out the reputation of that professor before you get into the lab. Ask around, how is that person? Is that person being notorious in their department for being pushy, or how many graduate students ever graduated from that lab, or things like that? These are the questions that you really need to ask yourself, because really you need to put your pride away and don't think, okay, these people can't do the PhD because they're not resilient or persevere enough like myself. I can certainly do that. And then in the end of the day, I really, the person that really got hurt is yourself, because you're going to be mentally uh, really damaged in the kind of a perspective after that long times of experience. Your confidence, your self-recognition, and all that kind of a soft spot inside of yourself is not going to be preserved if you have a terrible experience like that. So people have PTSDs after certain, doctoral experience. So that's why I strongly recommend you to do your homework if you ever going into PhD. Last but not least, one of my favorite thing during my PhD program is really to spend time with my fellow PhD candidates during a Friday or Saturday evening, get a drink, talk about all these things that only PhD faces, all the unique challenges, and then later we make that into humors. And that, in my opinion, is one of the best defense that I have and sustained myself through my doctoral career. So after all that, one of the quote I want to share with you, which reflects the kind of a mentality and the learning outcome I concluded from my years of graduate study is that, so the quote comes from a Netflix show called The Blacklist. It says like that: as you well know, one of the keys to my success is a clear and consistent understanding of my own limitations. So often people overestimate themselves, misapply their gifts. Wisdom is learning the boundaries of one's designated lane. And I really like this quote and often share that with my friends, is because I think that PhD itself, or any graduate study itself, is more than the degree work. You're going through this process, you learn something, you get a skill set of things you can do. But later, in the end of the day, what you realize is that you as a person has changed a lot versus the time you getting into the program. So it helps me to get a very clear and a very consistent understanding of my own character, what I want to do in the future, what I am good at, and what I am not good at. And certainly I'll not trying to do things that I am not designed to do, or trying to be overconfident or underestimate myself in doing certain things. So it aligned myself into a very good spot that I know exactly what I want to do and pursue, or the kind of effort I want to partake in my future. So that is the biggest takeout I have from my graduate studies. So after talking about all my experience and roadmaps during my graduate school, now let's talk about the transition into industry. So I really like this author, Simon Sinek. He provides a lot of leadership talks and all those books. And one of my favorite books from him is Start With Why, because to me, I also have the same kind of a personality that before I venture into any kind of a career or endeavor, I need to understand why I want to do it. And that's the same reason that I've been thinking over and over why I want to go to industry. Because first, I really enjoy the kind of opportunity to interact with as many people as possible. Staying in academia doesn't really allow me to have such an interaction with a broad spectrum of people. And then getting into industry really helps me understand how, in my opinion, the real world functions, because a lot of the academia pursuit or the studies in certain type of them may stop in the rather theoretical level, but many of them are collaborating with industry, with different departments. But for me, going into industry is a more direct ways for such approach. So without further ado, I will go through a lot about my transitions into industry, as well as a kind of a stepwise guide and expectations for you if you want to transition into industry in the near future. So first, I call that a job hunting a kind of a funnel, because you're going through several phases of things. The first one I call application phase, the second one screening phase, the third one interview phase, and the last one negotiation phase. The application phase, I spent about 2 months of time sending out applications, which is not in a huge number. I sent out only roughly 50 applications. But then during the screening phase, I got 13 of them screened from these 46 applications. And then I got 9 interviews, which is great. And in the end, I got 5 offers. So as you can see, the numbers of things you received is kind of going down the funnel. And if you put that in a kind of a time scale, I spent about 5.5 weeks sending out applications. At the meantime, I've been receiving screenings from different companies from another 5.5 weeks. And then I received interviews afterwards for the duration about 5 weeks. So notice that there is a time where you don't receive any interviews, but you are keep applying for different jobs. And this is the time that I call the stress period. And this is the time that you doubt yourself the most. Am I not good enough? Is there anything wrong with my resume? Is there anything wrong with my application? So your emotional, your confidence level versus your the time spans goes like this: up, down, up, down, up, down. You're going up when you receive a screening. Wow, some company is paying attention to me, and then it goes down. It's like, wow, after the screening, I never heard back from that company. And that kind of roller coaster feeling is something you need to expect during your job hunting process, regardless of your academic level. And then in the end, I spent about 2 weeks doing negotiations with the different offers I received, and I chose to go into Pfizer as a senior scientist in the analytical realms. So the topics that I'm going to go through in the transition have several. The first is expectations. Second, resume, which I believe there's a session yesterday talking very in depth about resume. I was also in that session. I think what Dr. Barber said is very on the spot in terms of getting a resume and cover letter down. And then other materials, research, interviews, and last but not least, offer negotiation. I have ranked them in a different kind of exclamation mark because in my opinion, certain things you need to put a lot more attention to it than other things. For example, interview, you certainly want to put a lot more preparation than that of the other materials that you're going to prepare for such a transition. So first, expectations. There are several categories of things you need to expect. For example, the timeline, which I'm going to go through a lot more in depth later. They're going to be involving like application, they're going to be HR screening, they're going to be hiring manager calls. Sometimes we call it a phone interview, which is not really an interview at all. And then followed by a full interview, which is really the interview because it's kind of, you're going to notice a difference. And then offer negotiation, then acceptance, then pre-hire processing, and then orientation and onboarding. So that's a kind of a general timeline for you to get a new job in the industry. And then the durations that personally that I've been through, the application could take really from 1 month to many, many months, depends on the kind of industry you're in or the kind of pace that you're applying for jobs. And the response from your application, some of them respond very quickly. They respond during the next day. And normally for companies that are responding during the next day, they're normally staffing agencies. For example, there are companies that is too small, that is only starting up their careers as a company. They may not have the necessary resources and the manpower to do talent acquisition. So they outsource their business to those agencies who offer them contract and headhuntings. One of the most famous ones called Flagship Pioneering, and there's also a lot of others, different headhunters out there that's doing the HR jobs for the smaller company and help you staff to a good spot. And these companies normally respond very quickly in terms of your application. And then there are companies where you send out the application, no matter they like you, they dislike you, they already have other candidates, they just never give you any response. So please do put that into your expectation that you may never hear back from certain jobs you apply for. And then recommendations that if you are serious about transitioning into industry and applying for job, you probably will reserve 2 to 3 months of time to do such transition. And this time is especially concerning for international students because your visa, your OPT, and all those start date and end date, the recipient of your ECD card and all that, you need to take into consideration to put a very good spot of yourself when you should start the search. And then the benefit that comes with industrial jobs comes in several fold, which I will also talk more in depth later down the road. So it comes in basically in a number of cash options, as well as insurance coverage, vacations, and many others. And last but not least, certain tips for the expectations is that when you're doing your application, do apply new, do apply fast, and do apply more, which I will also explain in the future. And then do expect there will be certain levels of confidence and stress fluctuations during your job hunting process. And then last but not least, after all the kind of a roller coaster feeling you had, your confidence damaged during the job hunting process, you finally received your first offer. And my recommendation is really do not rush into the first offer because the first offer doesn't always necessarily be the best offer. So I understand that we have been through a lot of stress, especially in graduate school, the kind of a mental stress we're going through, the minimum wages we receive, and then the job hunting process, the ups and downs. And then when there is finally light, it is our natural tendency to hold the light regardless of the conditions. So I recommend against holding that light too rushly. Just wait for a couple of days. Maybe you will hear back from more from other companies. Maybe you will receive other offers. So that is several tips I have to offer in terms of the expectation of the job hunting process. And here is a spreadsheet that I made for myself for my job hunting process. As you can see, some of them are labeled red, some of them has no color, some of them are green, some of them are yellow. And I applied for 46 jobs, and each one of them I have a very detailed records on them, like how they are going, if they have responses, if there's HR screening, if there's phone interview, if there's full interview, etc., etc. And then I made a table of a little summary over here. So all of the 46 jobs I applied, I got declined for 17 of them. And by decline, it means rejection directly from the company or withdrawal from myself. And then I got screened from 13 of them, and there's no response for 16 of them. So if you look at the ratio, you can see it's basically a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 ratio. And the reason I got a lot of them that does not have a response, or I got a lot of them have a decline, is because many companies, they post their jobs out either on LinkedIn or on many other websites. Some jobs has been posted for more than 2 weeks, or you can see because there's a duration of that. The job has been posted for 30 days, or the job has been posted on May 30th, 2021, etc., etc. So if the job posting date is too far away from your application date, your uh, your chance of getting noticed or getting response will decrease exponentially. So that's why I recommend you to apply new. For any jobs that is coming just into the market, you get a lot better chances of getting noticed. And then, of course, you should definitely apply for more jobs. Don't just apply for jobs that you think that is only pertain to your field of study or to your experience. Apply to as many jobs as you can because it literally has no harm to yourself for applying for those jobs. It may give more stress to the hiring manager to read more resumes, but it has no harm to yourself. Really apply more. So now let's go briefly over the resume because I know Dr. Barber has already gone extensively over the resume part. So here are some very general guidelines for resume. First, I call it the less, the better. Because just like Dr. Barber said, a resume is very different from an academia CV. It's not a place where you put everything you've done in the past into those pages. No, a resume is a presentation of the highlight of work you did in the past that is most relevant to the things that you're applying for. So normally 2 to 3 pages are the recommended volume of a resume. And then I do recommend you to, the second part is called give them the reason, because the purpose of resume is to tell the hiring person that you are the person for the job. And that's why you need to put the attention at the first half of the first page. Like what I put over here is an executive summary, basically is a one paragraph of words and telling them my expertise and what I want to do in essence. And that is the part they will land their eyes first. And then followed by that, I put a skill highlight over there saying the type of things I have experienced in the past and what I did in the past. And all of that is to give them a reason to consider you into the interview. So that is the most important. And last but not least is the relevancy and consistency, which Dr. Barber also going through yesterday, that the content you listed on your resume need to be relevant to the job you're applying for. Like he mentioned yesterday, we have a kind of a fallacy to think about when we put work experience out there, it has to be a paid experience. And as a graduate student, you do all kinds of things on campus. You do all kinds of collaboration research on campus, which are not necessarily end up as a paid job. So that's why things that is pertain to the job that has relevancy, even though it is volunteer job. For example, I put my nonprofit participation over here as a board of directors in the NPA and vice president and CEO in the NHGPS in there because I think it is relevant to the job that can prove certain point of myself. And on the second page, I put my TA or adjunct faculty, which is a paid job. And I believe most of the graduate students will go through the teaching assistantship. I put that the last because I don't think that is relevant at all to the job I'm applying. And I can say 99% of a graduate student has their teaching assistant. And that's why I don't emphasize a lot on that. And as you can see, I put my education on the second page, which is the part that doesn't get a lot of attention. And I don't emphasize a lot on my education. It's also because for the most of the time, when you're applying for the jobs, you will go through a job application app for different companies. One of the most common ones are called Workday or something like that. So it's a system where you need to put information into the system first before you're applying for the job. They will ask you, where have you worked in the past? What is your education background, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no point to waste the precious pages on your resume to emphasize your education where you already put that into their system and their hiring manager will see that when they receive your report. And then I also put a kind of honors and awards in the end because that's the part that I did receive a lot comparing to publications and presentations. So that's also something I concern to be more relevant towards the resume. So here is a kind of example that how I did to redesign a resume. So artistic wise, different people have different tastes, yourself as well as the hiring manager. So I will not put a lot of emphasis in terms of artistic view of the resume because we all have our own preference. But how can you doing some very simple editing to make a generic resume format looks a lot more appealing? Because like Dr. Barber mentioned yesterday, when you're sending out your resume to a hiring person, you are the only person from your end sending a resume to them. From their perspective, they're probably going to receive hundreds of resume, which they're going to screen over a short period of time. How do you stand your resume out to get you a better chance of getting noticed is the key here, because I believe every one of you here is very capable of doing what you do. But the question is, how do you present that in a way that get people's attention? So here is a simple conversion I did with all the functions you can find inside of a Microsoft Word. And first I did is I add a border to the page, because sometimes when you're looking at a lot of white pages, your eye kind of hurt. And if you add a certain contrast to it, it gives a kind of a refreshing feeling to the people that, oh, this person put more attention in the design of their resume. And it certainly relieves different levels of eye stress when you're going through 100 pages of a white paper. And the second thing I did is that instead of having a LinkedIn link over there, I add a QR code over here for people to easily scan. And nowadays, we all have digital cell phones, and with our camera function, we can easily scan the QR code. And just like the QR code I use in the virtual background. But for this QR code, you really can't scan it because that belongs to my friend. So I add a LinkedIn logo in there to block you from scanning it. But in the reality, the QR code will just look the one in my background or the one over here without the LinkedIn logo. And then I add an executive summary section over here to highlight the experience of this person and make that more relevant to the job they are applying for. And then I did some redesign of their name, just a very simple things to make it stand out. And I also did that redesign in my resume as well, because my name is relatively difficult to pronounce for the employer. And if you are an international students, you have a very long name or a very exotic name, you can also add a phonetic pronunciation to that. And people do appreciate your effort of making their job a little more easier by adding a pronunciation or even a gender pronoun after your name. And then I did some redesign to the different dividers of the sections to make it more clear and easy to read. And in the end, I put education last, just like I said before, and also like the LinkedIn pop-up pool I showed over here. So this is a poll that you often come and find on LinkedIn. People post a question and you just do an ABC choice. And one of the questions they ask is, which element should be considered most to get hired? And there's three: skills, educations, and experience. And after I participated in this poll, it showed out the result. It seems that 82% of the people from 2,000 votes believe that skill is the most relevant part of getting you hired, and only 3% believe in education. So if 82% people of the 2,600 people believe the same, there's a high chance that your hiring manager or your hiring person will also believe the same. So it is really unnecessary to put education first to occupy the very valuable space on your resume. And the next section is other materials besides of the resume you can prepare for. And here's a general guideline for it. These materials, they are good to have, but you don't need to have them, because they basically serve the purpose of adding extra credits to your work, but they may not appeal to everyone, and you may not even have the chance to upload them to your application, because for many times they only allow you to upload one document, which is your resume. And here is the first things that I included in my supporting material. And the first page is my entrepreneurial project I participated during my graduate studies. The second page is my non-technical presentations and publications. And the third part is my volunteer and service experience, and as well as my ambassadorship and the liaison experience. All of them are not directly relevant to the job I am applying for, but all of them can, from different perspectives, prove that I have certain skill set the company may be looking for. So I normally incorporate this part in the same PDF as my resume, but my resume still stands out at the first 2 pages. So if the hiring person has the patience to going through the whole documents, they could. But if they could not, my resume and the most important part of that still stays on the same page, on the first page, the first half of the first page. And the second thing is the cover letter. which Dr. Barber also going through yesterday. The cover letter is an opportunity for yourself to freely express that why you want to have this job. Well, unlike resume, which is a very structured bullet point of what you did in the past, a cover letter is a letter. It's a conversation you have with a hiring person. I have a 5-paragraph cover letter over here, which is pretty generic to the many format you can find on Google. And the first part is I express my interest, that why I want to apply for this job at this company. It's a quite generic sentences, but you can certainly add some personalized touch to it. But the second paragraph I put over here explains why I want to get the job or why I want to work for your company. Like I mentioned before, from the book Start with Why, it is always in the order of why, how, and what. You need to give others the reason first, why you want to work for them and why you want to get the job. And that is the most appealing to most of the people, because when you're telling a story, if you tell them why you're doing certain things, it may get their attention much more than you telling what you did. And then the next 2 paragraphs, I spend time elaborating my academic, my technical, as well as my non-technical background, and all of them having a purpose of elaborating on how and what I can offer the table. Basically, they are supporting the why claim I made at first and telling the employer that how I prove that I have certain capacity and what I did in the past to qualify for your job. Last but not least, I have spent a paragraph expressing my gratitude towards their attention and consideration. And also this is an opportunity to add in certain elements of yourself that you really want them to know. For example, I add in a link to a kind of a personality survey I did in the past to help them better understand what is my character and my personality. And that's just some very little things you can consider doing, because for the interview process, all the hiring person, the hiring team trying to get to know is how you are like as a person, whether they want to work with you, whether you are capable of doing the job, whether you want to do the job. So anything that can help them understand who you are is a plus, in my opinion. For example, your personal projects, your personal website, all of that can just help them understand you are the person that they want to work with. And last but not least, for the other materials, I also included a kind of list of reference, which you don't see very often, but certain companies in the end, before the offer negotiation, they ask you, can you provide us 3 to 5 names so we can talk to those references about your experience? And I have different references listed over here with their title as well as their contact information. And then most importantly, if you ever putting up a documents like this, or you ever giving others your contact reference list, it is important you tell them how you know this person, what you did together, and what kind of aspect of things this person can prove for you. Because often from not, if you just give them a couple of names, they are going to reach out to these person and asking them very generic questions. It is very difficult for the hiring manager as well as for your references to have a more spot on description of yourself if you don't give them any category or any descriptions of your interaction. So it is important to let the hiring team know how you met this person, what kind of work you did before, and what kind of a quality they can prove for you. And at the same time, it's making the job a lot more easier for your references to give you a good recommendation. And now one of the most important part is the research. I think I need to go through a lot more faster because we only have 10 minutes left. For the research part, a general guideline is to survey the landscape to understand the kind of industry you're getting into. And also the second part is really to know yourself, because only you understand what kind of work you want to do. And then as a researcher ourselves, one of the part we are most good at doing is to do research, to gather data, to compare, and then draw conclusion. So here is an example that how I do research, that I heavily rely on LinkedIn, I heavily rely on Glassdoors, and I also heavily rely on the company career site that help me navigate through different jobs. So on LinkedIn, you can type in any kind of a keywords that you want to look for, and then there's a kind of a toolbar over here, and inside you can set up an alarm. And you can set up a title of position as well as the location of the position, which gives you daily or weekly alarm on what kind of a new job has been posted at what company. And things you need to understand is that first you need to pay attention to the job titles, because different companies call the different kind of pay grade of job differently. Some of them calling scientists, some of them calling senior scientists. You don't want to apply for jobs that is below or too much above your current experience level. So it is important to understand what this job title means. The second is to find like what's kind of a desired job you're looking for. You want to focus on industry, academia, bench work, doing program work. And then locations do matter because it gives you different kind of experience as well as the pay level. West Coast, East Coast, suburb versus city. And last but not least, you need to pay attention to the company reputation. It's like the same when you're choosing a lab when you're starting your PhD. You need to put an emphasis on the reputation of the university, reputation of the program, and reputation more especially on the PI themselves. But for industrial job, you need to find out different reviews from Glassdoor about the company, how their employee recommends a company. And for Glassdoor, it's totally free. And in order to use that, they ask you to provide a review first. So you can really provide a review, for example, of a teaching assistantship at University of Pennsylvania. How that's that like, how much you get paid, what's your experience, and then it will unlock all the other features that you can go into different companies, their reviews, benefits, etc., etc. And now the part that we probably most interested in, the research on the money. And I'll go in through this part pretty quickly, but just really to show you what kind of how to do research over here. And for this part, I heavily rely on the tools of Glassdoor as well as Indeed. And in Glassdoor's, there's a section that you can find as, for example, for the company Amgen, which is a biopharmaceutical company I'm looking for myself. And there are categories: reviews, jobs, salaries, interviews, benefits, and photos. And in the salary category, I focus a lot more on the scientist job that I personally trying to look for in the Boston region. And I can tell there's a range it gives me from 108K to 124K with a very high confidence, which means the Glassdoors get the paycheck report from the employers uploaded to their website, which gives them a very high confidence in terms of publishing these data. And then what I did next is I find a couple of more other companies of the same kind, from huge size to very small starting up size. And all of them in my area, because I have no intention relocating to other region. And all of them in the PhD level, which is the level I am looking for myself. And you can see that all of them have different, even though they are of the same experience level, they have a different title. Some call senior, some call senior, some call investigator, some call scientist one, etc., etc. And then I just plug in these information back to Glassdoor or Indeed, and then they give me a range. And then I put all these ranges together, then I get an average. So the point of that is I hope you all to approach topics like this, especially like topics related to money, in a kind of a rational way, because whenever people talk about money, they tend to use their emotion a lot more than their ration. And especially as a graduate students, and you have been underpaid for so many years, and you are forming a kind of a tendency to underestimate your own value. And then when you're getting into industry, when somebody offered you a pay range that almost doubles your current paycheck, you have the tendency to accept that without any negotiation. So that's the part that I really trying to warn everyone to really use your ration to depend on the facts, not the feelings, when you're making judgments like this. And also, money isn't all the things you're going to get from a company, and then you don't need to put all your emphasis on money again. So the next part is interview. So we only have 5 minutes left. So I don't know if we have enough time to go through all of this, or we can use some of the time from the later discussion. Uh, so I have several areas to go through. So first is the interview. A general guideline is that to practice, practice, and practice. And you may never be ready for an interview, but you can always be prepared for an interview. And
Well,
the
I was
interview,
just going to interrupt you and say, I think the
yeah,
students, the trainees on the call would really appreciate hearing some interview tips. So I think you can go a little over if
sure,
you need
of
to.
course. Yes,
Thanks.
interview is a part that I put the most emphasis on because to be honest, most of the graduate students are relatively nervous, or anybody at all in general are pretty nervous about speaking in front of a group of people, public speaking. And especially for graduate students, we're not trained for this. We're trained to do research by ourselves or with a couple of others, but not speaking in front of 10, 20, 100 people. And then during interview, please do remember this is a two-way process. You know, they are interviewing you. That's true. But at the same time, you are also interviewing them, which means that you also have the right to decide whether this is the kind of a culture or the kind of a company you want to join. And then most importantly, I recommend you to apply as many jobs as possible, which means you can get as many interviews as you can. An interview is such a valuable experience because it helps you to recalibrate and train yourself to a kind of industrial levels that you are trying to get into. As a graduate student, we don't always have the necessary reflection of what the industry really needs, or what kind of experience, what kind of a verbiage, or what kind of a workflow they have in industry. So by going through these interview process, it gives you a much, much better understanding of what they're trying to look for, as well as how you position yourself in future interviews and situations like this. So the general interview process, as I mentioned before, as follows. First, you apply for a job. You apply for new jobs for the job that is recently posted. You apply fast because it is really a first come, first serve basis, even though they opened up the job for a certain period of time. If you applied as a first person, the hiring manager definitely going to see your resume first and then apply more. There's no doubt in that. And after your application, there's a chance you may get an HR screening. Basically, the talent acquisition or the recruiter from the company will contact you via email or via phone calls to set up a time to talk. And that normally happens between 1 to 2 weeks after your application. And what they will talk about during that process is your qualification to that job. Like they will ask you some very generic questions, why you want to work for industry, when can you start, what is your visa status, et cetera, et cetera. It's all HR questions. After that, the HR will relay all the answers of these questions to the hiring manager, and hopefully the hiring manager will set up a phone call with you, which is normally called a phone interview, but it's not really an interview at all because it's a 30 minutes long phone call or video call by the hiring manager. And basically the content of this call is that the hiring manager will explain to you what they want, what they are doing as their team, how their team fit into a bigger picture of their company, why they are looking for a new person to join the team, what kind of a job scope it is for that job position. And then they will spend half of the time of the interview to like you talk, like introduce yourself. Give me a couple of examples of what you do. And during that process, the key is that they're trying to align themselves as well as what you said with the expectation of that job scope. So during that process, you're really trying to use that very short period of time to give an elevator pitch to the hiring manager, what you did in the past and how that is relevant to the kind of work that you are applying for. And after that, after probably half week to 1 week of time, if the hiring managers really think that you fit into that position, they will set up a full interview. And the full interview I'll talk about next in the next slide. And it's a 1-day thing. And it normally takes about, it takes about 2 to 4 weeks after the hiring manager call. So just be patient to that. And if the full interview goes smoothly after that, you will receive an offer from their talent acquisition team or HR. That's normally about half to 1 week after the interview. So the interviews, here's a mock schedule for the full interview. And as you can see, the interview started from 8 a.m. in the morning and lasted until 4:30 p.m. in the afternoons. And the interview composed of two parts. The first part is a virtual seminar where you're going to spend 1 hour of time giving out a seminar, a presentation, a talk like what I did today. And afterwards will be some Q&A. And during this seminar, the whole groups of that hiring manager's team, probably a dozen people to 2 dozen people, or even 3 dozen people, depending on the size of the department, will join this process and witness your talk. And afterwards, there will be a couple of 30 minutes to 45 minutes sessions of one-on-one or one-on-several. As you can see, I have a 30-minute session with their director. I have a 45-minute session with several members of their team. I have a break, and then another 45-minute session with several members of their team, a break again, and then 30-minute session, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, and 30 minutes. And all these one-on-ones are pretty normal. That's why it's called a panel interview. Basically, they will ask the key person of their interview team to talk with you individually, ask some assigned questions, and get a feeling of you, how you like as a person, because these person are the person that you are going to work with if you get accepted to this job. So that's why it is important to make sure that they like you and you like them in return. And again, there's another example for the full interview and very similar to the first one. As you can see, the presentation, I spent 45 minutes in the noon to give the presentation. They give me a break, and then a bunch of one-on-ones, break, one-on-ones. So during these interviews, one of the most important things you need to know, who is making the decisions, right? Who makes the decisions whether hire you or not? So normally, if you get the opportunity to go into a full interview process like this, there are normally 2 other candidates also going through the process. So it is kind of an industrial norm to have 3 candidates brought up for the full interview individually, going through 3 days of work, going through the same group of people, asking the same question, doing presentations, all that. So you are one among the 3 to get interviewed. And there are 2 persons inside of the interview list that you will try your best to convince about your qualification. The first person is this one, the hiring manager. The hiring person itself who you already talked with during the 30-minute phone call. So basically, the hiring manager already liked you enough to get you into the interview because they think that you fit into this position. And then during the full interview, they just need to have a confirmation that you really can do the job and you really fit into the team. And the second person you're really trying to convince is the hiring manager's boss. So normally, if you're into the science field, you're applying for scientist position, the kind of people who interview you are probably a principal scientist or senior scientist. And then on top of them, there is a principal scientist or director level of a person who is their boss. So you are trying to convince these 2 persons that you can do the job, that you qualify for these jobs. And in certain occasions, for example, like my second example over here, the hiring manager and the hiring manager's boss are actually the same person. So they're basically hiring a vacancy in their team. And as of all the other team members in this interview, they are literally being there to get a feeling of you. And their job is to not veto you during their final discussion. You know, the point is to not get anyone from these interview panels to say, no, I do not want to work with this person. So that if you did that, then you are already successful in the interview process. And then as of the interview, there are 2 types of interview. So because of the COVID, it changes a lot of the scope or the landscape of our work. And all the interview process I've been through are virtual. But as I know right now, there's a lot more companies opened up for in-person interviews. So there are some differences between virtual and in-person interview. For example, During virtual interview, you have less stress factor like this because we are just interacting through a webcam. And you get to see me as myself. And certain cases, people in the early period of COVID, they tend not to wear pants when they having their video calls like this. And I do strongly recommend you to wear a pants during virtual calls like this, and to remember to behave professionally. And another perk of virtual interview is that you can have a cheat sheet ready, which means you can Google the interviewer on their LinkedIn to see their experiences, how that relate to you, how you can find common connections to understand where they came from. And at the same time, you can keep a Word document in the background and take notes. That's what I did in the past. I take notes of all the questions they asked me, and in the end, I summarize into something I'm going to share you later in the slide. And then technical proficiency is another thing you need to really master, because you cannot just know how to use Zoom, how to use WebEx, or how to use Teams. You need to be good at that. You need to know where to do certain things and what layout of that app. Because let me tell you, technical difficulties always comes up during the process. It's not a if, it's just always comes up. So make sure your speaker works, make sure your webcams gives a good vision angle of yourself during the interview. And several things about in-person interview. The best thing I like about in-person interview is that you really got to immerse yourself into the vibe of that company. You're gonna see the company, you're gonna see the workspace, you're gonna see the people in person. So by seeing them in person, you get a very direct impression of the company, as well as the outlook of the team. Whether these are the kind of a group of the people you want to work with in the following couple of years to decades of time. That is very important, and that's the aspect you don't get during a virtual interview. And the second part is all about the impression, because during a virtual interview, like talks like this, you're only gonna hear me and perhaps see me through the webcam. But during in-person interview, there's a lot more information the interviewer is gonna see. For example, your body language, your expression, your attitudes, how you dressed up, and all of that factors needs to be taken into consideration. Last but not least, during in-person interviews, please be very prepared. Not everyone on their team ever looked at your resume or cover letter before. So it is good to print out these resumes, cover letters, and the materials you have in the multiple forms so that you can easily distribute to the people that you are talking with, and they don't need to really be prepared again to pull up their end and things like that. And also, if you're going for in-person interview, make sure that the copy of your presentation and all other materials are backed up at the cloud or other places, because sometimes the technical things just doesn't work. Sometimes your flash drive get lost or to get damaged. Just make sure you have a backup. And a little bit about the presentation, I'm going to go through very quickly. And the presentation, the seminar you're going to offer to do during the interview is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So please don't be like me, like today, that I'm going above time, going over time. Please be prepared. Make sure your talk is short and sweet, 30 to 40 minutes, which is totally enough, because people will spend a lot more time to ask you questions. And then remember, you're trying to tell them a story, trying to communicate with them that why you are suitable for this job, even in the presentation part, and then keep it relevant to the position that you are hiring. So here's a picture of the kind of presentation I did for them. I basically chose 3 different projects, a small project I did in my tenure of graduate studies that is most related to their work and not get boring by taking too long for one project by itself. So again, it does not have to be your dissertation presentation. And as a matter of fact, I do not recommend that to be your dissertation, because your dissertation normally lasts sometimes between 45 to 50 or even 1 hour of actual talking. And then in the industrial setting, you don't have that much of time. And people don't really want to spend that much of time to listen to things that is not relevant to their position or to who they want to hire. And then another tips for the presentation. This is a slide I add into my presentation that has nothing to do with my content or technical background at all. But that is something I find I get a very good review and comments from my hiring teams and or from people that they really like a presentation like this, because I basically showed them a kind of a 3 key factors about myself, who I am like if I am working with them. I have 3 key qualities I listed here with a bunch of examples to supporting my claim. And I also showed them what kind of a personality and a character I am, and what's kind of a trait of that personality. And people find this really attractive, and they really like this kind of design, which because they want to understand how you are like as a person, how others judge you as a co-worker, because they want you to work with them. They don't just want to listen to your talk and then you're off you go. They want to see if you are good to work with. So do not be afraid to show your character during your presentation. And it is not a 100% technical talk. And this is another part people really interested in, because you often ask what kind of question they're going to ask, because it's so nervous. I have no idea what kind of a question I'm going to be asked during the interview. So there are 3 general types of questions people are going to ask during the interview. First is an HR type of question. Basically, it's a general information collection to see your eligibility. When can you start work? Why are you coming to industry? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? Can you work or do you need sponsorship? Etc. etc. There's no right or wrong answers about that. And it only consists of a very small portion of the entire realms of questions you're going to be asked throughout your screening and interview. And these type of questions are normally asked during the first HR screening or talent acquisition phone calls to asking all of these questions. And there's nothing to worry about these questions. And the second type of question is a technical question. And this is the part of a question I cannot personally predict and I cannot help you with, because we all come from different fields. Even though we're all in chemistry, our fields are vastly different. And this is the type of question generally asked by your hiring manager or by the hiring team during the full interview. The point of that is to really test your caliber, to test your foundation of background and knowledge, to evaluate the fitness of you towards that position. And there's nothing personal about that. It's really just want to see where you come from and want to see how you fit into that position. And also, if they ask you a question you have no idea about, it is okay to say you don't know, because they're not expecting you to know everything. As a graduate student, you only have this much of time, resources, and experience to do these much of things. So it is okay to say you don't know, but it is not okay to say, I don't know, and that's it. So if they ask you something and you say you don't know, but I have did a very similar experiments or used a very similar instrumentation before like that, and I can tell you more about it. So people really like the kind of a term like this, that they understand that you don't know everything, but they appreciate that you don't know everything, but you can relate to something that is very similar to that topic. And the last question, which I can totally predict, and I can offer you a cheat sheet in the following slide, which is called the behavioral question. And that, in my experience, that consists almost half of all the questions they ask me during interviews and screening. And the behavioral question is basically to fathom your character, to trying to know who you are as a person, which that's why I also recommend you to add a lot of personal touch into your resume, to your supporting material, to your cover letter, to your presentation, because these questions they're going to ask you anyway. So why don't you just present them ahead of time? So the point of that, again, is to find whether you click with their team or not. It is really important, because in the end of the day, regardless of the kind of work we take, academia or industrial job, we want to work with the people we like. We want to feel happy in the end of the day through our interactions with our colleagues, to become a friend with them, perhaps. So that's why it is important for them to find out that you are not something that do not have any characteristic trait that is not acceptable to them. And also, this is the part that is the most fun because you can be as creative as you can get during the answering process. And here I'm going to offer two examples. And the first one is that question, tell me about a time you met obstacles in your work and how did you overcome it? It's a very typical question you've been asking in all kinds of interview. So I've been through 9 actual full interviews, and I write down all the questions they asked to me. And in the end of the day, I find the questions they really trying to ask are highly similar in terms of what they're really trying to know. So I put up the Word documents, which I can share with you if you want to. And for this question, what they really want to know is not exactly about that particular obstacles and how you overcome them. It's really your problem solving skills and how you innovate in a time of a challenge. So the kind of answering strategy that I propose to them is do not be afraid to share your failures, even if the outcome is against your wish. But what you're really trying to convince them that is that you achieved success in the end of the day because you learned from your failures, and all these learning outcome helped you during future obstacles or obstacles of the same caliber. And really, you should not just tell them I failed an experiment and that's it, but you should tell them I failed an experiment and then later I find out it is because this, and that, which I implemented in the future and make sure my following experiment doesn't fail at the same fail in the same fashion. And then in the future, a different challenges comes in. I use the same kind of mindset to create a solution and helping solve that problem. So here I'm going to pop in an advertisement of myself. So if you want to get a full document of this Q questions and answers, please feel free to scan that code, and which will lead you to my LinkedIn. Or you can also find myself on LinkedIn. Just connect with me, message me, and I'll be more than happy to share the full document with you. And the second question that I want to show you is that they asked me, how do you deal with disagreement, or how do you deal with a conflict with your colleague? It is also another very common type of question because what they really trying to know from you is a kind of a conflict resolution and your interpersonal skills. Because this is a part we as a graduate student not getting trained out, because we're getting trained of our technical skills. We're taking courses, we're finishing Q exams, we're writing publications, doing presentations, but no one ever told us how to be a better person in terms of interacting with others. And that's the part you learn from your extracurricular work, from conferences like this, from opportunities where you got to meet people, sometimes maybe disagree with them. So the kind of answering strategy is really depends on your own personality and your own character. But what I answer to them is that I always trying to find the source of that disagreement and assume them with the best intention. And knowing that we have more commonality than that of a disagreement. So by putting away that kind of a pride factor at first, it become a lot more easier to interact and convince people or even change our actions afterwards. So the key, and after that, please do remember during your interview process, especially the one-on-ones, people will leave 10 to 5 minutes of time for you to ask questions to them. And this is the opportunity you really want to take advantage of to ask whatever kind of a question you want to ask. Really, that's the time that you get to know them. How is the company like? What's the company culture? How do you like working with this company than your previous experience? So really, it's not the answer that enlightens, really the question that you're going to ask the interviewers that help you understand their company, this position, their team, and help you make a decision in the end. So talking about decisions, this is my last sections of my presentation, which is the offer negotiation. And the guideline for offer negotiations is really be patient. Like I told before, we have the mentality to grab the first candy that is presented to us because graduate school is nothing easy at all. And normally people, when they issue an offer to you, there's a process. You can counter their offer by saying a different number. They will give you their counter back. You can counter again, going back and forth of that process. And after you reach a kind of agreement on what kind of a number you're looking at, you normally have a 5 to 3 business days of time to make the final decision, yes or no. And also, you should always try to negotiate an offer, no matter how good it seems to be. Do not accept an offer without any negotiation at all. Really, you need, this is the time. This is about something for the following 3, 5, or even 10 years. You really want to put yourself and advocate for yourself during that process. And it is completely okay if you receive multiple offers and you have to say no to several of them. And they understand because they're not expecting everyone to say yes to them. It is completely okay to no, but please do not burn the bridge because you never know if you're going to meet them in the future. It's a small world in different kind of industry. And just establish a good relationship, tell them really appreciate their effort, give them a very short but straight answer why you cannot accept their offer and wish their good luck for their final candidates and et cetera, et cetera. So just be polite, maintain that bridge, do not burn it. And here is some things that you really want to consider during offer negotiation. And that is something that I can also share with you as a format of an Excel sheet for you to fill out if you connect with me on LinkedIn. And this is something that I concluded through my several interviews and offer negotiation process, the type of things you should consider when you making an offer with them. So the career level is basically what's kind of a career level they offer to you. Most company offer you a scientist level as a PhD or postdoc. But some other company, if they really, really want you, they even bump up your career level from a scientist to senior scientist so that you can have more appreciation if you choose to work for them. And then the location is the part that really matters. So please don't think about, okay, maybe I get a job at Philadelphia, but I actually live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Well, it's okay for me to commute into Philadelphia at first and things like that. But then in like a couple months later, you will find that commuting is really intolerable. Spend hours of time like getting into and out of the city or getting into a location of less favorable places. So that's something you want to take into consideration. And the part that we commonly thought consists of the major part of the deal is the pay. So the pay consists of the base pay, which I showed you before in my statistics, the little statistics I showed you. And then besides of the base pay, there's normally an annual target bonuses from 10% to 15% on top of your base pay, depending on your performance. And that's something you can also consider into your negotiation, because normally if you perform well, you will normally hit that performance bar, getting a 10% to 15% of addition to your base pay. And then there's also companies that may offer you a sign-on bonus, a $10,000 sign-on bonus, or a couple $1,000 sign-on bonus if you chose to work with them. So all these 3 categories, the base pay, annual bonus, and sign-on bonus, consist of the first year total pay, which is a much, much bigger number than the numbers that I showed you previously. And then certain companies, especially smaller or medium-sized company, offer you stock options.
I hate to interrupt you about these important aspects of the offer, but I think unfortunately we're going to get close to our next speaker time. So I'm not sure if you can share with us some sort of overall ideas for the negotiation part. Obviously, this is really important aspect of this, but if there are some sort of like overall thoughts you could share about the process as we transition forward here.
Yep. So really the overall thank you. Sorry to taking so much time. And
that's okay. It's really important stuff.
Yeah. Don't be like me. Please be prepared and practice your things. I think I really have a passion to tell people my experience. So please, again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want a one-on-one session, I'll be more than happy to offer you and going through the things that you are most interested in, and also sharing you all the documents that I made that help you during the transition. So really the key of offer negotiations is be patient, and always try. you need to consider the part you get paid, cover your insurance, your vacation, etc., etc. There's also the intangible benefits you need to consider, reputation, job security, career perspectives, because you may not just want to work for a company for a year. You may want to work for 3, 5, or even decades of time. So how the company is doing is also important for you to take into consideration. So lastly, I have 4 takeaways. First, remember your training. As a graduate student, PhD, postdoc, or even undergraduate student, remember your training. You are trained to do research. You're trained to think rationally, to apply critical thinking skills to your daily life. So remember your training and do use that during all the processes and the transitions. The second, to find your purpose, because in my opinion, after you knowing what you're trying to do in your life, as well as the mission of your life, it is a lot easier during a lot of the processes. You know exactly what you are trying to do. You have a clear and consistent understanding of your goal and your limitation. And remember, money will come eventually if you are living a life driven by your passion. And the third one is to monitor your burnout meters, because as a graduate student, we often work late, work at off hours. We often don't have a work-life balance. And that's a kind of a tendency we may tend to brought into industrial world, because we've been working very hard to get where we are to graduate as a PhD. And then when you get a new job, you tend to do the same thing. I do warn you against doing the same thing when you're getting into a new job, because it set up an expectation of others that you work 200% all the time. They will see that 200% as your 100%. So even though later you think it's time for you to tune back to get more work-life balance, you couldn't anymore, because if you tune back, people would think your 100% is actually only your 50%. So really, chill, relax, getting into a job, relax, get a kind of a life-work balance set up at first. Last but not least, never stop learning. Our world is changing so fast. Even after COVID, the work we know has changed so much, so rapidly. As a researcher, as a scholar, do not forget your training and never stop learning. And that's the thing that you learned, or the reward that is the most coming out of your graduate degree. That is what differentiates you from people who did not receive the same kind of education or experience. It is your capability of doing learning to apply that to your daily life, and your appetite to never get tired or exhausted from learning. So really, that is all the important part I want to share with you. So I understand we go above time, and we probably don't have time for Q&A, but feel free to find me and add me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have, giving you the documents, or even giving you a one-on-one if you have specific needs. So thank you really for your time.
Fang, thank